What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living in Iraq and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Also, if you love cigars, check out our premium and exclusive sit down cigar available at Pravada Cigar Club. The link to buy is in the pinned comment below of this video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And Vincent Gigante is one of the most well-known mobsters of all time. He essentially ran the Genovese crime family for 30 or so years. We don't talk much, though, about his downfall. Today, we're going to talk about a little known individual that essentially sunk Vincent Gigante. The story of mob associate Peter Savino next on the sit down. Now, in this episode, I'm going to disclose exclusive information about Peter Savino. In the early 90s, he would become a confidential informant for the FBI. However, it has been rumored that he had been a confidential informant for nearly 20 years. I'm going to disclose where Peter Savino was sent after he cooperated and his very quick and wistful end after he cooperated against Vincent Gigante. Peter Savino was born on September 6, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York. He would grow up in the mob enclave of Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. There is no area in New York more fertile for the mafia than Bensonhurst. Dozens and dozens of gangsters, both low end and high end, have come from Bensonhurst. And today it is still somewhat Italian, not much, but there's still areas of Bensonhurst with the mafia in it in 2024. Now, Peter Savino had no connection to the mafia. In fact, he grew up in a very middle-class family. And I went back pretty deep in his lineage, and there was no connection. He would go to Catholic school, and his father owned a sheet metal business to which he would work at in his high school years. Now, it has been rumored that at one point, Peter Savino actually even went to college, serving several semesters in college. Now, I don't know where he went to college, but there have been rumors that he even actually tried to go to college. That may have learned some business things from college because that would help him down the road. Eventually, he would join Local 580, which is the Iron Workers Union, essentially the bridge, structural, ornamental, and reinforcing unions. And in his time there, he would also learn business acumen and use some of his connections to make himself a lot of money. There's one thing about Peter Savino that I've noticed. He was a very smart individual, definitely had a business mind, always wanted to kind of create something for himself. The thing about Savino, though, and a thing about a lot of these individuals that were born in the 40s and their 20s were in the 60s and 70s, is the connection to the streets is always there. And any young kid growing up in Bensonhurst wanted to be a gangster, right? You saw those guys. They were making money. And a lot of the friends that Peter Savino likely made had familiar connections to the mafia. Now, he would obviously have his job as an iron worker, but he had a connection to the streets. Through the streets, he would meet Gerard Papa. And we have done a video. I did a video on my old channel about Jerry Papa, which can be seen here. Him and his son are very well known. And Papa was a lethal killer for the mafia, but he also was a successful earner as well. He made a lot of money in the drug business and with Savino down the road in a very lucrative operation. Now, during his time in the Ironworkers Union, Peter Savino would meet a shop steward and eventual business agent for Local 580, a person called John Sonny Morrissey. You can see Morrissey to the left of the woman on the phone. He and Savino can be seen coming out of a restaurant with Gambino-made men, Caesar and Anthony Garino. Now, through their connection, Morrissey and Savino would essentially strike up a friendship. And down the road, Savino would use Morrissey to connect himself to both Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso. In and around the time that Savino was working for Local 580, he would get the idea to create a window install business. Now, what he did was through his connection to Amuso and Casso, he would ask them for nearly $1 million to invest in a business that he had his eye on something big. Savino realized that eventually the nearly 350 housing projects in New York were going to need an renovation, and the city planned through funding to install new windows in every building. Now, understand there are thousands of windows in every building, and Savino believed that his company could influence bid rigging and allow them to get hundreds of millions of dollars in city contracts. So this was an easy sell to people like Amuso and Casso. There's one thing about Amuso and Casso that we don't talk enough about. Were they lethal? Absolutely. But Amuso and Casso, remember, were in on the ground floor of two of the most successful mafia money-making operations of all time, the Windows case and the gas tax scheme. Both of them were involved with that intimately. So we don't give them enough credit for that. Now, Savino, alongside Gerard Papa, would create a window install business called Arista. And what they would essentially do, like I said, is they would rid bids to window install contracts on every window that needed replacing through city projects. Now, what would happen is the mafia would install that 4 families would have representatives that would control their family's interest in this nearly $300 million affair. Now, the only family that was not involved in the window scheme was the Bonanno crime family. And for the mafia, they would make hundreds of millions of dollars through this scheme to defraud the city of New York in window installs. Now, not only was Mr. Savino involved in this very lucrative operation, but he was also working with his old friend, Gerard Papa, in making money doing everything from drug dealing to selling contraband and stolen goods to extortion. Now, Savino and Papa were also called upon to take part in murders. And there's one thing we know about Gerard Papa. He was very involved with murders. And one of the murders that he would commit alongside Savino was the murder of Thomas Shorty Spiro. That would occur in and around 1980. Now, it has been discussed that not only was Savino involved in this murder, but it has also been discussed that he was involved with the murder in 1984 of Angelo Seppi. Now, Seppi was a Lucchese associate who at one point was involved in the Lufthansa heist in the late 70s. Seppi was the nephew of Shorty Spiro, and he had been running around saying that he was going to kill Jerry Papa for killing his uncle. And he also, from what I understand, robbed the stash house belonging to Gerard Papa. In 1984, Seppi and his girlfriend, Joanne Lombardo, would turn up dead on a Bensonhurst street in a car. Now, down the road, when Savino was arrested and faced a jury in the Windows case, Bruce Cutler, who was Peter Gotti's attorney, would actually grill him on the Seppi Lombardo murders. He would claim that he didn't take part in them, but that he knew who took part in them. Now, again, we'll find out that he had to discuss every crime he committed. Do I think he was involved directly in killing Seppi and Lombardo? No, but he probably had knowledge of it and knew who did it. But he never was charged, as far as I know, in that. But in the end, it was rumored that Savino had been involved in up to 5 murders on behalf of the mafia. Now, the issue that Gerard Papa had was when he killed Shorty Spiro, that was done on contract. He was paid by someone to do it. However, Shorty Spiro was a made member of the Colombo crime family, and that is a no-no without sanctioned approval. Gerard Papa had to face the fact that he was going to have to sit down with someone on this, and that's exactly what happened. Papa would be called to a meeting where he would have to be called to the carpet to people like Chin Gigante. Now, as far as Papa knew, he left the meeting and believed that he was going to be okay in all this. He wasn't. Down the road, Papa would be killed in June of 1980 in Brooklyn. It's said that the people that killed him were sent by the Colombo crime family to avenge Shorty Spiro's murder. Now, upon the death of Mr. Papa, remember, Savino is an associate, right? He's not a made member. He is on record with the West Side under Jerry Papa. Now, Jerry Papa's captain was an old school capo called Rosario Palmieri, aka Sally Young. Now, Sally Young goes way back. He was an old Mike Miranda disciple. He had connections to Vito Genovese. Sally Young was, old school, but he was messing around and meddling around and taking drug profits from Papa. He was also trying to kind of move in on Savino and take all his businesses. And basically saying, hey, Papa's gone. You're going to kick up to me. And you're not only going to kick up, I get all the spoils of everything. So he was trying to kind of muscle in. And this pretty much annoyed Savino because Savino was, again, on the ground floor of the Windows thing. And, you can't just take all the guy's money. You take a portion of it, which, again, he's the captain. You got to do that. But Savino, I think, was a little annoyed by this. Eventually, this would get to Chin Gigante. And as we know, Chin and Fat Tony, they don't want capos taking drug money. This is in, the 80s. So instead of calling in Sally Young, Chin goes to Savino, which is crazy because Savino's an associate. However, Savino had connections to Joe Zito. He had connections with certain powerful people. So what do? They call Savino in. They want to kind of put him under the lights and start talking to him about Sally Young. What is he doing? Who's he taking from? How much is he taking from you? Is he taking drug money, etc.? Savino was called in to a restaurant in Manhattan. At the restaurant was Vincent Gigante, Funzi Thierry, Bobby Manna, and Fat Tony Salerno. Think about that. Savino is, a young associate. He's not a made man. He walks into the room and those four are there. They're four of the most powerful people in New York at the time, as far as mob circles. And it brings me back, in a way, to the scene in The Sopranos when Finn is called in front of Tony and Paulie and Bobby and Christopher and Silvio, where he has to disclose that Vito Spatafora is a homosexual. And again, I'm not saying Savino was Finn, because Finn was just a regular boyfriend of Meadow, but he kind of is called in and he has to sit under the lights, all these very powerful people. Now, again, Savino passes with flying colors. He answers the right questions. He gives the right responses and kind of says, hey, this guy's trying to take all my businesses. He's taking drug money. And down the road, Sally Young would be demoted and eventually be shot at and would survive, but he would go into hiding. For Savino, this was major because for whatever reason, Chin Gigante takes a liking to Peter Savino. Savino then reports directly to Chin Gigante and through Joe Zito essentially has a line to the boss of the Genovese crime family. Think about that. Savino hit it big, not only with the Windows contract, but he gets the ear and trust of Vincent Gigante. Now, it's unclear exactly what about Peter Savino Chin liked, but we'll find out that down the road, even after there's rumors that Savino is a cooperator, Chin Gigante still doesn't want to believe it. If I could ask Chin Gigante one question, it would be, why did you give so much trust to Peter Savino? Again, a lot of people did. But again, this guy did Chin in. Now, during the 5 or so years that Chin had him directly report to him, it was rumored that Chin even talked business with Mr. Savino. At one point, according to Savino, he would testify that Chin encouraged him to circulate the story that he was, quote, insane. At one point saying, quote, don't be afraid to tell people I'm crazy because I'm crazy, don't you? So that's pretty bad. And that's on tape because, again, we'd find out that Savino wore a wire against Chin. Now, also at one point, Benny Eggs Mangano, who is Chin's, right up there, right-hand man, scolded Savino on tape for referring to Chin's name over the phone. At one point, Savino accidentally mentions the name Vincent, to which Benny Eggs responds with, quote, "Don't mention that guy." So again, a conspiracy, right? Don't mention that guy above me. Vincent, who else could that be? So what this is down the road when Chin claims that he's crazy, this is asserting that he is not crazy. In fact, the underboss, Benny Eggs, said don't refer to him, meaning that he's above him. Vincent's the guy at the top. Very damning, right? Now, in the end, Savino was living life. Things were working out really well by the mid 80s for Peter Savino. He had a line to one of the most powerful people in the country. He was making a lot of money. He was young. Things were good for him. The problem was an old friendship would do him in down the road. Now, in and around 1987, Peter Savino is doing his thing. An old associate of his who he used to run around with Jerry Papa, a man called Bobby Ferenga, an associate to the mob, is selling narcotics and he's busted. Doesn't want to go to jail. So he says, "Hey, I got some murders for you. In fact, not only do I have murders for you, I will take you to where the bodies are." So he does. And he involves Peter Savino in this. Peter Savino is eventually arrested by the FBI very quietly. Now, facing life in prison, Peter Savino decides that he will wear a wire and testify against his very powerful friends. Now, according to the FBI, we would also learn that according to Savino, he had been a confidential informant since 1973. That's the rumor about Peter Savino. He had always been a CI. Remember, understand what I recently said in this video. From 1973 until 1987, that's nearly 15 years. Savino had been involved in up to 6 murders. He had involved very powerful people. He did all this while possibly being a CI. Now, in 1987, they would decide to say, "Hey, we're going to send you back out there. You're going to wear a wire, and you're going to get these guys on tape." That's exactly what Savino did. In May of 1990, due to some of the work of Savino and others, multiple members of the mafia would be arrested in the Windows case, including Vincent Gigante, Venero, Benny Eggs, Mangano, Peter Gotti, as well as Benedetto Benny Alloy, the underboss of the Colombo crime family. And other members of these families were arrested as well. All the people I just named, including Peter Gotti and Benny Alloy, were the liaisons for their family to the Windows case. Now, I do want to make it clear, down the road, Peter Gotti would actually beat the case, but Alloy would get jammed up and go to prison. Benny Eggs would go to prison. And the star witness in Chin's case was Peter Savino. Now, remember, Leonetti testified, Sammy testified, but they believed that Savino was the top witness in this case. Now, this case would drag on. And from 1990 till 1997, Peter Savino lived somewhere in America. And in a bit, I'm going to tease this. I'm going to tell you about Peter Savino's life. No one has ever reported this, but I will. And this is my investigation. This is what we do. We find out what the lives were like for some of the biggest informants of all time. Now, for Savino, by 1997, which is when this case would actually go to court for Vincent Gigante, he would actually testify, but it would not be in person. By late 1997, Peter Savino was very weak. He had cancer, and he would actually testify via closed circuit television from his home, essentially. He was that sick. And even during the time of his testimony, Mr. Savino at one point would say, quote, "I need to stop a minute now. I need to go take a break." Another point in which several recesses were requested. A prosecutor would then say about Savino, quote, "The witness is in a lot of pain." Now, during the testimony, he would very much sink Gigante, even telling him that Gigante would take him to an undisclosed location and interrogate him about possibly being a rat. Someone would hold a gun to his head. Now, what I find fascinating is during the time that Savino was wearing a wire, Gigante was presented with multiple opinions by both Casso, Amuso, and others that they had hard information that Peter Savino was a cooperating informant. Even at one point saying that they could provide paperwork. Gigante wouldn't believe it and continued to deal with Peter Blackheart Savino. Why that is, we don't know. And again, if I could ask Gigante one question, why he continued to deal with Savino. This is one of the more secretive men in America. This is a man who pretended to be mentally incapacitated, mentally ill, to feign prosecution. It's amazing that he would still deal with Mr. Savino. In the end, Savino was believed by the jury, and Vincent Gigante down the road would be convicted and receive 12 years in this case. Now, as I said, between 1990 and 1997, Peter Savino would live a life of luxury, in fact. I would learn through a source about his life recently. According to the source, from what I know, Peter Savino in hiding would live under the name Peter Russo. And for the time of his hiding, he would live in a southern suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. According to the source that I have, he would say that he came across Peter Russo because he stuck out. He had a very strong New York Italian accent. And this has been reported by someone who would actually find documents from Peter Savino that his name was actually Peter Savino and that he was from New York. The confidential source would tell me that Savino drove a early 90s blue Dodge Viper with the streaks on the side and on the top of the vehicle. It was also said that Savino had a very nice lake house in the Ozarks with a nice boat. Now, the source would tell me that Savino, very much around that time, was very polite, but he always came across as very edgy. The source would tell me that he knew someone that knew Mr. Savino, and his interactions with him were always fine. No one ever asked him who he was. No one knew who he was. And the source would tell me that he didn't know who he was until years later, to which he would eventually find out. But he would say that he was a big guy. It was very nice and very secret. Didn't get married. As far as I know, didn't have any kids in his hiding or anything, but that he had a woman that he was dating at one point, and he'd actually leave his car to her, as far as I know. Peter Savino would last just enough time to convict Vincent Gigante. Savino would die on September 30th, 1997 from cancer. He was 55 years old, and he died just under 3 months from when he testified against Gigante. Vincent Gigante, as we know, would die in prison in 2005 at the age of 77. Again, the old question is, for as secret as Vincent Gigante was, what made him trust Peter Savino so much? Do I think Gigante would have been convicted without Peter Savino? I'm not sure. I don't think. Understand that no one seemingly had more connection and exposure to Gigante than Savino. Remember, Gravano was in a different family. Leonetti was in a different family. Vinny the Fish Cafaro, he didn't provide anything. Savino was very detrimental. And not only did they convict Gigante, but they convicted Benny Eggs and other members of the mafia. Peter Savino, a guy that not many people talk about, was very destructive to the mafia. He never was a made member either. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of it in the comments below. We'll see you next week here on The Sit Down.